Hello, 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 and welcome to the Sprinklr Coffee Club. I'm Marshall Kirkpatrick, your host here at the Sprinklr Coffee Club. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to encourage you to pour yourself a cup of coffee or whatever else you would like to drink because you are in for a special treat today. Here on the Sprinklr Coffee Club, this is a show where we talk about digital transformation, customer experience, customer care, digital media. All those things are almost synonymous increasingly, and they're really defining of the increasingly of the world that we live in as well. And in that constellation of themes and topics, it is a special treat today to have as our guest one of the most connected nodes in the network, Mr. Paul Greenberg. Paul, thanks so much for joining us today.
Are you kidding, Marshall? This is my pleasure, really.
Paul,
I'm just glad to see you, sir.
Thanks. Yeah. So Paul is my friend and yours. Paul is a longtime prolific writer on the way that software is changing the world, both the way that companies relate to their customers and the way that they make an impact in the world at large. He is the man behind the CRM Watch List Award. He is the author of 8 awesome business books. He's great on Twitter, and he's a real cool guy. So it's a great delight to have you on the show today, Paul. If those of you who are joining us live would like to ask Paul any questions, feel free to pop a question there into the chat on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube, and we will work it into the conversation. How are you doing today, Paul?
Actually, pretty good. Just finished my CRM watch list. Been making phone calls with people I'm trying to help out in varying areas of the industry and elsewhere. And other than that, I'm even better because I get to talk to my 10-year and more, actually, friend, you. So I'm great.
Oh, thanks, Paul. Yeah, it's really, really a delight. So speaking of friends, you said, it's been almost 10 years ago now. You said publicly that that people that when customers like you and they continue to like you, then they do business with you, and that's CRM essentially. And I think that in the analyst world, so often people assume that that analysts like people because they do business with them. The other way around. But I think that people just plain like you, and so it's a pleasure to get to do business with you. But is that does that still feel true today? Is that why people do business with the companies that they do?
Yeah, it's actually fundamental to it. Look, if you break down everything that we talk about and all the complex issues and all the complex concepts and concerns, the frameworks we work with, the technology we work with, the processes that we embed, the interactions we have, and the transactions that occur, they still all boil down to this simple principle. And to take it to its more formal version, it's if a customer likes you and continues to like you, they'll continue to do business with you. If they don't, they won't. And it's always that way. Look, we are human beings first, okay? Regardless, customers are just one of the roles we happen to have as a human, right? We are also employees. We're parents. You know, we're siblings. You get it. Friends, works. But we're ultimately human. That means a lot of what we do is driven by our likes and dislikes as individuals. Now, here's the funny thing. And we got to take it as biggest picture. We have 7.5 billion people on the planet, and there's literally one thing that we all have in common, that we all want to be happy, and that's it, right? And that on our journey to happiness, we want to be happy. We don't want to be miserable on our journey to happiness, right? So what happens is, if you think about that, that's just us being human and being self-interested. And that's not selfish, by the way. Self-interested is different. It means that's what we want to be on the earth. We want our lives to be good. And whatever that form that takes is up to the individual to decide and then to act on. But that's what it's about. Now, if you think about our interactions with a business, let's say, we want to be happy in those too. It doesn't mean we want to be overjoyed. We don't have to be delighted all the time. That's kind of a joke, actually, right? But we have to have a result that we want when it comes to making us want to keep doing business with that company. What would that be? Well, first and foremost, if we're trying to buy a product, we want to be able to buy a product. Part of that wanting to be able to buy a product means we want to be able to buy it easily. And that also means when it comes down to the other side of it, meaning, well, that one wasn't exactly what we needed, we need to be able to return it easily. We need to be able to communicate with that company easily, meaning if I need to talk to a person, I need to talk to a person. I need to communicate via text, I need to be able to communicate via text. In other words, it has to be convenient for us. Look, one of the best customer experiences in history when it comes to convenience is walking into a current UPS store. Literally, think about it. What are you going to a UPS store to do? Right? You're going there to drop a package and go. And if you have a good UPS store, which is a lot of them, in 2 minutes, you're in and out. That's it. And it's all you're there for. You're not there to sit around, have coffee. You're not there to, learn about how logistics works at a macro level. You're there basically to drop a package and go. Now, think about it. You go on Amazon, right? You go to Amazon. What is the best thing in the world about Amazon? Is it the CRM system they're using? No, it's that they make everything convenient for you. And now I want you to take what I just said about UPS and take what I just said about Amazon, right? You want to return something to Amazon and you do it via UPS store. What happens? You walk in with the item you want to return. It's not even packaged. You just hand it over to them. You have a mobile scan that they do, and then they hand you something and you walk out. And they package it and they ship it and they send it and the refund shows up. They say, wait 3 to 5 days. It shows up in a half hour as soon as it's scanned. In other words, much more convenient could it possibly be, right? So you have two things that happen there. One is you continue to buy from Amazon, and two, you continue to go to UPS stores because everything's so easy. That's actually how we live when it comes to companies. If you want to call that delightful, call it that, but it's basically convenient for you. And that's what it means when I say, if a customer likes you and continues to like you, that keeps happening. I'm going to keep going there. I'm going to keep using Amazon to buy stuff, and I'm going to keep using UPS to return it, right? That's what we're talking about. Now, here's the other side of it. If they don't like you, well, that's hell to pay, right? And you're gone. I mean, we've all seen the data, which is, what is it? Three bad experiences and pretty much guaranteed out, right? I mean, that's an amalgam of lots of data, but basically averaging it out, that's about it. And 3 bad experiences, meaning that system I just described broke down. That's 1. Somebody yelled at me on the other end of the phone. That's 2. I went into a store and no one served me for 15 minutes. That's 3. They could be as disparate as that. Doesn't matter. You're gone. And you know why? Because you got everyone else in the world you can go to, and it makes it easy for you to leave. So when you're talking about like and dislike, it's tenuous, but that's literally the foundational principle of all CRM, all customer experience, and all customer engagement.
Fantastic. So when a person starts thinking about this from their business perspective, it's tempting to see it as a never-ending race to deliver satisfaction without end, and quickly the business reality of constraints come into mind. And you have said that when planning customer experience and thinking about it, step 1, is that fair to say, is to identify the constraints, because all businesses will have to operate within those. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, the funny thing about all businesses is they are literally, the day they're born with constraints. Think about it. You create a business. Maybe it's an LLC. Maybe it's a sole proprietorship even. Maybe it's a S corp. Maybe it's a full corporation. But one way or the other, law steps in, right? Regulation steps in that second. And the second that happens, you're constrained by law and regulation. If you're just born, you're constrained by you're constrained by money, you're constrained by labor power, you're constrained by time. And as you grow older and you get bigger and bigger, you're constrained by money and you're constrained by labor and you're constrained by time. Nothing changes there, just different forms of it. So you start with constraints. The other thing you realize is that if you've grown to a large level and you actually recognize the fact that, that individual customers are now looking for individual responses, they're not just simply happy with getting a generic product or service anymore. They want you to identify the fact that you as a company value them, and B, you are providing them with meaningful options in their interactions with you, right? They want those as individuals. And you recognize, well, I have 200 million customers because I'm Citigroup. I really can't provide 200 million individual solutions to every customer without hiring another 199,500,000 people, or more than that, actually, but I can't do it. So what am I going to do? Right? I'm constrained by all those things already. So what am I going to do? Because ultimately, the thing about the customers, they really don't give a crap about your constraints at all, nor do they give a crap about the other customers they're dealing with that are there, right? They want what they want, and they know they can go elsewhere if they don't get it. So what do? Well, you sit down and you say, well, you know what? There's a lot of information about these customers we already have in-house, and we have a lot of demographic information about them, and there's a lot of individual information about them that's publicly available out on the web for all kinds of reasons. We're not getting into privacy issues at the moment, but we can capture all that data. We can interpret all that data. And we'll find out of that 200 million customers, you know what? Even though they're all looking for individual kind of validation and individualized, personalized response, 167 million of them are satisfied by about 35 different things that we could offer within the constraints we have. So let's put them out there, and and this is key, let's give them the choice of which ones they want to choose. So if I, Paul Greenberg, go in and I say, oh, well, yeah, there's like 32 things there that are interesting to me. And that could be, by the way, a product, a service. It could be a consumable experience. It could be simply a form of interaction, a channel available to me, whatever. It's anything, right? There's 32 of those that are interesting to me. And customer 2 says there's 18 interesting to me. Another one says 32, but it's a different 32 with the overlaps for me. But all in all, those 35 satisfy 167 million people. One thing happens. I choose 14 today and 9 tomorrow and 16 the next day and 28 of those 32 the next day. But on the one hand, I'm feeling valued because I'm being offered things that are meaningful to me. And on the other hand, I feel like I'm in control of my interactions and my experience as a customer, because I'm picking the ones I want to use that are relevant to me now, right? And I get to do that. So consequently, I like the company. They're thinking about me and they're letting me do what I need to do, which means that they're thinking of us as kind of a collaborative partnership, even though I'm not, as a customer, my thinking isn't that level of sophistication, but that's the feeling that I have. And that's all that actually matters in that case. It's how I feel about that company, not how I am thinking about that company. It's how I feel about it. If I like that company, I will continue to work with them. So that's where the constraints are still, even with constraints, you can still identify and work with customers on a massive scale. It's why we have data and analytics, and why we have insights that we can then use, and why we can develop programs around that engagement, and why we can utilize all that data actually in real time now to make sure it gets to the customer in a timely way that makes them feel as good as we can. That's what we do.
Let's talk about some
if we do it right.
That sounds great. And you've got a bunch of examples of places where it's been done really well, a number of which came from the world of gaming. Sports and gaming both are industries that you pay a lot of attention to. Can you tell us about some of the lessons learned from those fields?
Well, I'll take, by the way, when I say gaming here, I don't mean gambling. I actually mean like PC video gaming, right? I am a gamer. So put a lot of time into figuring that out just because I thought it was pretty cool to figure out. And interestingly enough, I identified the fact back in 2005, I spoke at a Gartner conference, which was unusual because I'm an analyst, right? And I wasn't a Gartner analyst, right? So I was one of the, I think I might, one of my proud achievements is I think I'm the only non-Gartner analyst to speak. I spoke 4 years in a row, right, at a Gartner event. Now, you'll note, by the way, that picture of Mickey Mantle in the back. I just want to point it out there. So I studied gaming, and I was looking at them as the prototype at the time, now a fully realized business model for true engagement with customers. And here's some good examples of what I mean when I say that. So if you go back all the way to, and we're going back 30 some odd years here, you go all the way back to when Doom came out and later Half-Life and some of these other kind of first person shooters. Some interesting things happened in the very early days of Doom. The owner of Valve Software, which is John Carmack at the time, John Carmack noticed that Doom was getting hacked by some kids who basically didn't like the game the way it was set up. So they just hacked into it and then kind of remade it in the way that they wanted to play it. Now, Carmack, unlike some other companies I could name, Carmack actually saw that at the time as a good thing. He said, whoa, yeah, you know what? Why don't we release tools that will allow people to help modify these games so they can play it the way they want to play it? We don't care if they play it exactly the way we made it. There's a lot of people who might want to play it that way, and that's fine. But there's a lot of people who won't, and yet they'll buy the game, and we can give them the tools so that they can make it in the image they care to make it in. This created what was called the modding industry. And the modding industry, which is gigantic right now, or it's not really an industry, but the modding community, right? Mod community is gigantic now. And basically, if you go to the more advanced forms of games and you look at the platforms around games, which is Steam, you're about to see a cat cross my path. I don't know if you can see him or not. Yeah, that was his tail. This is Cutie. All right, Cutie. So if you look at the more advanced forms of games around the platforms like Steam, which is owned by Valve, which is Carmack's original company, you see literally at this point millions and millions of gamers using a single platform where all games are being placed on, where they can buy them. The way that, for example, updates to games are handled is through effectively subscription in the cloud approaches, and you don't pay for them. Basically, when you pay for the game, it'll update automatically or manually right on the platform, so you have all your games updating simultaneously. You also have a community, which is a community built around modding the games. There's modding engines in most of these games, and they're being customized. You have community discussions around the mods. So, for example, there's a series which has been wildly successful called Total War. It's put out by Sega now. It wasn't originally, but it's now. And there are dozens of games that have been like popular to the point of millions of every new version of itself. Millions and millions. It's $1 billion industry just for this game. In its earlier days, it was the first game was called War Total Rome. Total War Rome. No, actually, it was Rome Total War, right? And there was an enormous amount of gamers who loved it because it realistically creates units and battles, and you can argue strategically. You can run your empire through the Senate, and and there's intrigue, and it's actually a reasonably realistic version of how Rome ran, and with visuals that are off the charts and tactics that you have to wage on individual battlefields, etc. All right, so there was a large community of folks who loved the game, but they were very, let's say, anal about their history, right? They were absolutely said, nah, it's not accurate enough. So they created a Rome Total Realism mod. Now, I want you to understand how this looked. There were 32 people doing this. They were from about 11 countries. The entire mod was created with a joint community of people, a user forum, basically, area, where they all worked together to create the community. They had literally people who were graphic designers, who were Roman history strategists, who were experts in Roman, professors who were working on this thing. They had a publicist even, right? And they were giving this away for nothing. But if you looked at the discussions going on, they were arguing. I mean, seriously arguing over the color of a banner of a particular unit of Roman soldiers, right? It was that detailed. And then they built this mod, which was, a couple of gigs. And this is back in gigabytes in 2000, maybe. No, 2007, 2006. They built a couple of gigabyte mod. It was day one. It was downloaded 800,000 times, right? And this is a group that never met, and they're dependent on community support. Like, give us a few bucks, like $3, right? And we can keep building it. And they're building it to this day. Well, imagine this at scale by the tens and tens of millions of people doing this to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, thousands actually, of games. That's what we're dealing with. Now, let's look at it, break it down a tiny bit around why is that great engagement? It's almost obvious on the face of it. You have a community who's literally freely participating in the co-creation of the game, with the company providing the tools necessary to do that freely, and the community actually being able to distribute the game via the platform that's being provided to do so, as well as it being a commercial platform for all the vendors of the games. And the interaction is continuous. Everything is convenient to one place. The community is in one place. The manuals are in one place. The games are in one place. The continual interactions are going on nonstop. And the games themselves are being played, of course, multiplayer, single player, et cetera, et cetera. That is intense collaboration around, and it's the highest level that you can possibly have of customer engagement. And even though it's a B2C situation, it's at an enterprise scale. That's when you're talking about engagement, the way it's supposed to be done. Now, do most companies meet that standard? Not even close, right? The vast majority of companies don't even know the difference between engagement and experience at this point. So, right, and that alone takes work. So right now, though, you're looking at a paradigmatic situation when it comes to the extraordinary. What is the extraordinary when it comes to customer engagement? How do you do? It's hopefully someday going to become the ordinary. That's, why I'm evangelizing much as I am on engagement. I want it to become the ordinary, and then all us customers will be treated great.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's incredible to imagine. I know that social impact is really important to you, and that is itself an incredible impact on the millions and millions of people whose lives are enriched by that experience, by the self-actualization and creativity and connection and learning and joy. But additional forms of social impact are also things that you discuss regularly in your writing and other media, and you have said recently that that social impact as a factor in business has really arrived, that its time is now. And I wonder if you could flesh that out a little bit and perhaps speak to how we in business might make an even bigger impact.
All right. So I'm going to start with a story that goes to when I was a little kid. It's one that pretty much defined how my life went from there on. When I was a little kid, I was maybe 7 years old. We were living in East Meadow, New York, on Long Island. And my parents called me into the living room, I remember. And they said, it was my dad who actually said this at the time. He said, Paul, look, we brought you in, and keep in mind, I'm interpreting this as from an adult. It's an adult version of what I think I heard when I was 7, right? So the language is probably a little better than it was when I actually heard it. He said, Paul, look, we brought you into this world, but you don't owe us anything. But because you're in the world, you owe it something. And, next few years of your life, as you grow up, you should figure that out and then go do it. And my entire life has been defined by that one way or the other, right? I've done everything I've ever done. 22 years I spent in politics, everything. Now, the thing is that it's why I have a very strong commitment to making sure the companies out there, right, realize that they're not just technology, especially the tech companies I work with or involved with. If I don't work with them, they're not just technology with institutions wrapped around them. They're companies who have an obligation to the people they serve and the planet they exist on, right? And and what we're seeing, and honestly, a lot of that got sparked, I'll say, by how far Salesforce publicized it. But every company does some of this. It's sparked by how Salesforce publicized it. But the reality is that most companies, especially the largest enterprises, are getting involved in a fairly substantial way when it comes to, it's called corporate social responsibility, but that's sort of a bad name for it. Let's call it philanthropic activity. For example, what you might not know, and this actually goes to the heart of a problem, I think, is Microsoft does $1.6 billion of philanthropic work every year. And that involves grants, that involves free technology, that involves time volunteered by, paid time from employees volunteered, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And one of their initiatives they have, for example, is called AI for Good. And think about, it's AI for health services. It's AI for the earth. It's AI for cultural heritage. It's AI for, assistance, things like that. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant program. But I venture to guess you didn't know anything about it till I just mentioned it. If I look at smaller companies, and I honestly, I have no idea what Sprinklr does really when it comes to the corporate social responsibility. But if I look at smaller companies like, say, Pros or Thunderhead or Sales Eye, or I'm just randomly picking actually, but whoever, they all have some kind of program which could be as little as some community volunteering or some involvement in their community. But here's the reality of it. There isn't a company on the planet who is earning revenue, is making some sort of revenue that has the right to not be involved in something to help the planet that they're gainfully taking from, right? And that could be, again, there's a million ways to do that, but it's their responsibility to do that. Why? For the exact same reason my parents told me I needed to do it. They are on this planet, so they owe it something, right? And it's why you see my emphasis greatly expanding for that. And also, to the credit of most companies, they're understanding that. Some of it's understood for dire reasons, meaning climate change and global warming are screwing the planet up, and increased amount of carbon screwing the planet up, those kind of things. And some of it for, let's call it, purely reasons to support good and to help solve problems. Look, another person who's had a great deal of impact in that area on companies by his own and her own work is Bill and Melinda Gates, with the foundation, right? Which of course is unbelievable. And they're taking on the big problems. For years, IBM used to have programs where they travel to third world countries and build things, right? And IBM staff were fully paid to do it. It was volunteer though, and you had to apply actually to do it. And IBM provided all the resources, including labor and materials, everything, and got it done, right? But this is not nice for you to do that. It's not like, oh, this is nice. This is a responsibility that has to be done. You owe the planet something because you're taking from it, right? And from my standpoint, I'm relentless on it too, and I will continue to be relentless on it in every way I can humanly be relentless, right? And I'm a New Yorker, so I can be very relentless.
Fantastic. So, I just love that part of what you're doing, Paul, and climate change in particular so needs voices like yours and all of us making that call to action and making commitments. We've got a question from the audience, it turns out. So before we wrap up the show, Paul, if we can keep you for a few minutes here. Oh, it's a double question even. Yeah, you can see those up there on the screen. It looks like I've got an overlay that's blocking them myself.
Okay, the first question says, "Who was the last Yankee to hit 400?" I honestly, I'm thinking through. I don't know if there was ever a Yankee that hit 400. I know that Gehrig hit like 378. This is actually, I'm not sure.
Is this a Boston fan
Roger,
asking this question, I wonder?
no, it's actually a good question. I don't think there was ever a Yankee that hit 400. It might be a trick question. If they have the answer, I'd like to know it, because I, much as I know Yankee history, and I do, I can't remember a single Yankee that hit 400. So, whoever you are, tell me the answer. Now, number two, it says, do you think Gartner will ever publish a CRM MQ, and why? They actually do, right? They have been for years, right? It's veered off to the ridiculous at various times. Like one year they had a social CRM Magic Quadrant, which they didn't even need their own standards for a Magic Quadrant, much less a legitimate Magic Quadrant top area, because social CRM, let's put it this way, just to show you how silly it was, is 2011. The winners were Jive and Lithium, who don't have a single CRM feature at all, or didn't have. They're not really around anymore. And then every single other, ones who got in were niche players, which tells you it's not a Magic Quadrant, right? And it didn't even meet their definition of a Magic Quadrant by their own actual definition, revenue-wise, et cetera. So that said, they published over the years traditional MQ, right, which is sales, marketing, customer service. Now, of course, you see it broken out. It's SFA, it's customer service, not even customer service, it's customer engagement hub, right? Marketing automation, and then it's facets of that. I mean, honestly, look, should they do a CRM Magic Quadrant? Of course, meaning bring back one that's a little more contemporary. Will they? I doubt it. It's, they're a smart company, and I actually admire a lot of the analysts at the company, but they're $1 billion company that has a lot of mouths to feed, including its own as a company. And so it's easier to break it out, and you tend to make a lot more money doing it that way too. But they, the analysts that they have doing it have integrity. Forrester, on the other hand, has Kate Leggett and doing CRM, and they do look at CRM, and then Ian Jacobs will look at things like customer service and so on. And those two are great analysts, just great analysts, who I presume you're in touch with. If you're not, I'll introduce you, I promise. Anyway, so they should, but they should, but they probably won't.
Interesting.
Oh, that Ty Cobb wasn't a Yankee. Ty Cobb was a Tiger, Detroit Tigers.
Tiger in Detroit. Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
Yeah, hardcore. Never was anything but.
Well,
I mean, Ty Cobb hit 400. Yeah. I'd like to talk to this person who asked the question.
All right, we'll get to the bottom of that, Paul. But we can say that when it comes to CRM analysis and reports, you have been spending countless hours, hundreds of hours, for years on your CRM watch list. You just announced the winners last week. And now we'll start over the coming months writing your incredibly detailed analyses of those winners. And I am really, really excited to read them. I always enjoy them and feel like I learned so much, even about the companies that we do business with. So I want to thank you for that incredible service that you do. Any notes as we conclude on the CRM watch list?
Yeah, it was interesting. This year had a couple of fascinating, I'll call it indicators. Now, keep in mind, I don't call these trends because I'm working from a sample of 71 companies who submitted reports that range from 18 to 213 pages, right? So it's not really a trend. I'm looking at the submissions. The one that actually struck me the oddest, and this is just odd, obviously with GDPR and CCPA and everything else, there's a huge emphasis now on privacy and how we use data and the customer's ownership of data and so on and so forth. And, every company is being, even if they don't want to be in compliance, they're being forced into compliance because of the law, especially if you do any business with the EU at all. Now, what makes this interesting is one of the things that struck me, and again, one of my questions actually addresses that specifically. And I ask, how do you handle privacy? And I mentioned GDPR and CCPA. And one of the actual requirements of GDPR is that you have a privacy officer, a data privacy officer, right? And in the 71 submissions I got, only one company on the privacy question or anywhere, even in the management team question or anywhere, mentioned a data privacy officer. 1 out of 71, when they're required by law to have them, which tells me one of two things. One is they're not in compliance, which I doubt. So I'm pretty sure they are. Or two is this person is sort of meaningless at the company. Why would you not think of that? He's like he should be a major person at your company. It's by law required to have that person, him or her, right? And you don't even mention you have one when I'm asking you explicitly about those very same things that actually created the law, right? So it really struck me oddly when the only company that mentioned it was Thunderhead, was UK based, right? And that was it. So that was one thing. On the broader side, the broader and final thing, I think I would say this year on the good side was, to the point we talked about earlier, every company had a corporate social responsibility program. However, on the negative side, when you're looking at it, very few of them want to talk about it, right? They think it's marketing when you talk about it. And you know what my point is on that one? See, because the companies that do talk about, like Salesforce and Zoho, nobody sits there and says, oh, that's just marketing. Because ultimately, if you actually think about it, if you were thinking about it in the context of marketing, that is literally the world's most expensive, ineffective marketing campaign in history, right? Because here's a company, Microsoft spends $1.6 billion on a marketing campaign that they never talk about, right? So, I mean, it's not marketing to talk about the good you're doing. People want to see it. They want to hear it. It inspires them sometimes. And minimally, it says, you know what? That's something I believe in too. I'll continue to actually buy stuff from this company because they're supporting things I do. And you may lose some people here and there who don't support what you do. If you're supporting a lower carbon footprint, or campaigns against global warming or whatever. Somebody who doesn't believe in global warming, our usual moronic group. If somebody doesn't believe in global warming, you may not buy from you. So what? Right? The reality is you have to talk about it. It's so important that you do. Look, you don't have to, obviously, up to you, but it's so important that you do. And what I noticed was everyone's doing it and very few are actually talking about it. So my plea to everyone, all of you, at least you 71, and maybe the three of you who seem to be willing to talk about it. So let's make it 68 of you. Companies, talk about it now. Today, tomorrow, talk about it. It's important.
Hallelujah.
There you go.
That's a great note to conclude on, Paul. And I'm so glad to get a chance to have your voice here, singing the praises of speaking up about that social good and impact. Paul, it has been a real pleasure to get to. There are probably some people in our audience who weren't yet familiar with your work, and so I'm real glad to get a chance to introduce them. But I know a lot of folks who are watching have been following your work for years. For those who want to plug in and continue to learn from you, what's the best way to connect with you? Well,
let's see. LinkedIn, of course, which is LinkedIn, and then you see P. Greenby down there on the overprint there, or the title. That's my LinkedIn, that's my Facebook, and that's my Twitter handle. So at P. Greenby on Twitter, and then LinkedIn and Facebook without the @ and then you're fine. So any one of those is fine. My email is paul-greenberg3@the56group.com. Happy to communicate with anybody who wants to.
It's amazing. Thank you so much, Paul, and good luck with all of the writing work you've got ahead of you here for this year's CRM Watch List awards. And thank you so much for joining us today.
And Marshall, thanks for having me, and just thanks for being my friend all these years too.
Likewise, Paul. We'll keep in touch. Thanks, everybody, for joining us today on the Sprinklr Coffee Club. We hope that you will keep on coming back for more incredible conversations with remarkable people, and we appreciate your time today. All right. Take care, everybody.